All right. Well, hello and welcome everyone to our first data working group meeting of the 2022-2023 school year. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Michael Good and I'm the Director of School Support for the New York Charter Schools Association. I'm joined today also by Kevin Riley, who is our Network Operations Coordinator, who's essential in running the logistics and the background for these data working group meetings, as well as all of our working group sessions. So we really appreciate you joining us. For those of you who have joined us in the past, we are really excited to welcome you back. For those of you who are new to this forum, welcome to the Data Working Group. This will be the second year of us exploring this working group and the subsequent topics. We ran a full year of meetings last year with success, and now we want to build that momentum, continue to build this community of practice, continue to connect data managers and people who wear data hats at their school from across the state. We really hope these meetings can be an opportunity for sharing those resources, those best practices, and hearing from helpful speakers and experts in the areas of IT, data, and school reporting. And to that end, we're going to be doing a variety of formats to our sessions through the Data Working Group. We'll be mixing it up between sort of content deep dives, where we explore some area of data management and use, but also maintaining what have been some more popular topics, which is our data management tutorials, where we bring in people from state entities, from the authorizers, to walk through and talk through sort of the state reporting deadlines and the state reporting process. So we're going to be mixing it up a lot this year, but on a basic level, we'll be meeting monthly. We have monthly meetings from now till late May, and we intend to meet basically on the third or fourth Tuesday of each month. So depending on sort of breaks or holiday schedules, we typically meet in the later part of each month. And if you've registered for this meeting, so you're here through the Zoom link, you should have received additional calendar invites for our remaining monthly meetings going forward. So we definitely encourage you to reference those calendar invites, but we do also send emails periodically 2 weeks out, 1 week out from our meetings to remind you about those events. So thank you for joining today, and we hope that you'll continue to join us as we move forward. In addition to our monthly meetings, we do hope to share with you guys some special sessions outside of our regular occurrence. These more ad hoc sessions may be in the forms of workshops or office hours around data reporting or investigating or having the ability to investigate a data platform a little bit more. And we'll be sharing those sort of special sessions or those special workshops with you both through our meetings as well as through our digital workspace in the association's resource center, which we'll talk about accessing a little bit later in today's meeting. But with that all being said, I'm really excited to share with you today's session because we're thrilled to be hosting 3 veteran school data managers who have extensive experience working in schools from across the state. These are really knowledgeable and experienced leaders who have done a lot of work transforming the school data collection processes in a variety of systems. I think for anybody who's new to the data manager role, and we may have a few people on the call today who are either starting in a data manager role for the first time, or maybe they're a school leader who is sort of wearing a lot of different hats, and included in that is data management and data reporting. We think this is going to be a really beneficial conversation for you. So please feel free as we move further into the discussion today to join in with your questions, with your comments and your own observations about your school's data management. We'll begin with a bit of a moderated conversation with our three panelists, and then we'll have some time for Q&A. And so without further ado, I'm really excited to introduce our panel. First up, we have Alan Thorne, who is a data and technology leader specializing in education data, data strategy, and bridging the gap between data and operations. He currently leads the data and technology team for Faith Acts for Education, a Connecticut-based advocacy nonprofit. Alan has worked on state reporting for over a dozen charter schools in upstate New York, has been a frequent presenter at DATAG, and is developing digital tools for school data managers. Allison Song is the current data strategy manager for a charter school in the South Bronx and is entering her 14th year working in education. For the last 7 years, Allison has focused on creating robust data architectures in schools that connect data across various systems to improve data accessibility and inform decision-making. Allison is excited to continue this work in data architecture to help schools with everything from automating state reporting, which I know sounds very enticing to many of you on this call, to evaluating efficacy of educational software. And finally, we have Amanda Warko, who is currently the Senior Director of Data and Compliance for Coney Island Prep Charter School in Brooklyn, New York. Prior to this role, she has worked in network operations for Uncommon Schools and published research on education finance at Georgetown University. She holds a master's in public administration from NYU and a bachelor's from Wake Forest University. In her non-work time, she likes to explore New York City and is currently touring all the playgrounds of Brooklyn with her 3-year-old. I did have to include that in your bio, Amanda, I'm sorry. But I do want to welcome all 3 of our panelists today. Alan, Allison, Amanda, thank you for joining us and sharing us with your expertise. So we're going to begin and kick this off with sort of a more general question, because I know I shared your bio a bit, but I want to hear a little bit from each of you about sort of the systems, the school systems that you worked in, because those really sort of dictate maybe some of the different opportunities and challenges with working with data. Can you describe a little bit about the types of school systems you were in? Were these large networks? Were these groups of schools? Were these single site charters? And what did you see as some of the unique features of working in each of those systems? I'll open that up to the group. Start.
I'd kick us off. So I have worked, most of my career has definitely been in charter schools, but I did work for Uncommon Schools for a few years, which at the time was in a period of huge growth. And by the time I left I forget how many schools, but it was probably like almost 20 schools that I was working with in Brooklyn, whereas I've been at Coney Island Prep this is going to be my 7th school year, and we are 4 campuses, but K through 12. So we're a much smaller system. And then I haven't worked for the New York City DOE full-time, but I did do internships there when I was in getting my master's degree. And so I had like a little bit of insight into how things were working there, working with some of their data and research teams. And so I think, as our biggest challenge is like a smaller organization is that we just don't have always, the budget or the staff to automate things or to create like the customized things that people are always really asking for. And so we kind of have to do some make do and do more things in Google Sheets than we ever really want to be doing in Google Sheets. And so that's been something that's always been a challenge. And I think we are, making small progress as we have been expanding and trying to automate more things and make our systems work together more smoothly. But I think, we always will just have a limited number of staff who can devote time to that. So especially coming out of the pandemic, when a lot of things that weren't essential kind of got pushed to the side, we've been trying to bring our focus back to doing a small number of things well, instead of trying to do everything that everyone wants and not do it well. And that's always, I think, a challenge as a data manager, is people want so much from you and I want to be able to provide it. And they often have good reasons for what they're asking for. And I have to, keep in mind, like, what is our actual capacity to give you something? I want to give you something that's correct and timely. And that means I have to say no to other things that might be really useful, but are just a little bit beyond our capacity to do well.
I appreciate that tension. I think we can see that reflected in a lot of places in education, but definitely in data. Alan and Allison, do you have other reflections on sort of the systems that you've worked in? I know, Alan, you were at Uncommon Schools as well, working within a region within Uncommon Schools, among other opportunities. And then Allison, I know you work mostly with a single site charter school. Is that right?
Yeah, currently I'm with a single site in their 4th year being open. And prior to this, I was at a network of 4 schools and growing. I started there when they were 2 schools. So lucky enough to work with a smaller group. So there are things that I can implement pretty easily. And my goal in this single site is to build things that do put us in a good place as we grow and expand, which was my experience in the other network when we grew from 2 to 4 schools, so still on the smaller side. And to Amanda's point, I think always understanding your scope and like what data is like built to gather, right? I think it's sometimes we're not in a place to even gather in the data, the raw data that people want analyzed. So always starting at square one of like, what data do we have? How confident are we that that data is clean and accurate? And then what systems and resources do we have to get that data in the place that stakeholders want to look at it? So I think, I think no matter the size, those are always the questions you're starting with. And I think, one thing we can get into this a little more later, but one thing I try and do is systematize things as much as possible. So even if the system is a Google Sheet, that it's protected, that, we put the right like securities in place, and utilizing some of the great features of like Google Apps and using a little JavaScript to format data in the way you want it, so that an operations person who only has time to click a button can still feel like they have the data they need to report.
That's awesome. I want to get back as well to that systematization piece. I think that is so crucial. Ellen, any other reflections on sort of the operating environments that you've worked in terms of size and scale with schools?
Yeah, so I've mostly been upstate in the Rochester and Capital regions, doing a little bit of everything. I was with Uncommon's previous Boston, Troy, Rochester team for a while. And I've also been with some single site schools, both again in the Albany area and in Rochester. Some of the biggest challenges and tensions that I would see were, number one, sustainability. It's easy to just be that person in that one little room in the back that nobody really talks to, doing mad scientist things with all of the data, because they want to just silo it away and not think about it. And having to constantly ask, am I building something here that's robust, but also is going to outlive me here, that this school can carry on, or this system of schools can carry on and continue to work with. And also with that invisibility is trying to integrate with what are typically some really great operational practices that just don't take into account reporting. So a lot of schools, especially charter schools, when they've got great backing and great networks behind them, they come with these plans, and then it comes towards the end of the year and they've got these reporting requirements coming from the state that they haven't thought about for a year, that they didn't really know that they needed to think about. And now the data's not there, and they're wondering, well, what do we do now? And taking the time over time to build that into just the way the school is operating day to day, so that they're keeping track of the same reality that they want to reflect on later. Always a different and unique challenge at every place I've been, and always a whole lot of fun to try to get right.
So I am interested in that piece around what you're collecting, and I'm wondering, does working in a multi-school environment, sort of at a network level, create additional challenges around communication, like collecting data across multiple sites versus a single site? Were those unique things that had to be negotiated, that you have to not just communicate with one school leader, but potentially multiple school leaders or multiple directors of operation? How did communication across multiple sites come into play when you were talking about more than just one campus? And I know each of you have been in a situation in which you were collecting data from multiple campuses. How do you be proactive with that communication, I guess, is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, I think I was lucky enough to be somewhere where everyone was open to structures for communication around this. And so I think, I didn't have to have much buy-in. I think people love that they can give the data to someone to fix it. So they were more than willing to, when we had a meeting, and like I said, the structures were in place, that we could talk through the requirements of, how do we capture IEP data? How are we capturing attendance? And how does it need to look so that we can report it clearly, and we all know what the definition is and where we're putting that data. I think Alan brought up a really great point, that I think there are times where what's best for operational productivity is not always what's best on the data end, right? It might make it to where now the data is not collected in a way that you can report it, or vice versa. The data is collected in a way that's great for reporting, but it makes it very difficult for operations and school leadership to do their job. So I think that's always a tough area to figure out. But again, I've been lucky enough that people have been invested in understanding, systematizing these things so that you can get to a place. Because I think for most data managers, if you know the data is coming to you in a specific way, then you can plan ahead for how you're going to deal with that data and transform it, and getting ahead of any of those issues versus finding out a week before that the data looks different and maybe incomplete. So I think, if you aren't in a school that has those structures in place, really figuring out how to build those relationships with operations and school leadership so that you're able to see their day-to-day and understand why the data looks the way it does, so that you can come up maybe with some solutions that meet everyone's needs.
Thank you so much for that, Allison. Other reflections on that communication to avoid the silo? I think you mentioned, Ellen, a little bit, like there may be this tendency to feel a little bit siloed as the person who's like doing data every day, but you need to obviously interface with lots of people. All this work requires teamwork across multiple stakeholders in the school. How do you build that teamwork ethos around data?
Yeah, actually, personally, with the teams that I've been on, I typically consider myself to be the least knowledgeable about what the data actually is and what it means and why it's important. Just the most knowledgeable about how to manage it and how to get it from point A to point B and make sure that it's well stewarded. And in an environment when you've got multiple schools, multiple leaders, it's actually easier to navigate that sort of thing, at least from a communication standpoint, because you know who to talk to. It's already structured, like Allison was saying. The difference with single sites and smaller groups of schools is that sometimes when you do get to a point where you've decided together, hey, we actually need to make a change here in order to be able to do what we need to do later, sometimes you can just do something on the fly to fill that gap in a way that you can't really do when you've got larger systems at play. So like an example of this, it's typically illegal to collect race and ethnicity information on for charter schools because it could be seen as discrimination on the basis of race and ethnicity. But then you also need that for state reporting. I've seen some small schools just be like, hey, let's just hand out a survey in homeroom in a way that doesn't necessarily scale when you've got 10 schools in 2 cities. But yeah, so the communication, actually a little easier on a bigger scale, but it's harder to actually make those changes when you need to.
Yeah, and I think we try and really balance taking as much away from our campus ops teams that they don't need to do with also having them understand some of what we're doing so that they know why we ask them to do things a certain way. I think we've definitely made progress on that as an organization. And I think the other thing that is important is like we have really good systems set up in the beginning of the year, but then if you don't check in on them, they can fall away. You think things are happening because they were at one point, and then you realize that we stopped doing, someone forgot to keep putting in the data that way. So I think you try and do regular check-ins, and then I think you just have to build relationships to avoid being the person that pops in every few months and is like, you put your data in wrong again. And they are like, I don't care. I'm trying to run a school. Like, so I think I just try to, making sure that I am like a presence on campus and that I know people and that I have set up like some of the whys for things so that I can sort of do a reminder of like, hey, remember when you're, we need to record these suspensions in this particular way because we have to report these things. And I think it helps having been here for a while and like having those relationships because it can be tough at first when you have to care about things that people, don't feel super important to people's daily work.
I think those are 2 great recommendations, always explaining the why and making sure you're a presence on campus. I hope from some of our younger data managers on the call, are writing that down. I think that's super important. I think to get a little bit more sort of overt and explicit in this, can you talk a little about the core responsibilities that each of you has at your schools or when you worked in schools? What were sort of the core responsibilities that sat under the data manager role? And how did those sort of get reflected within the cycle of the school year? Like, how did you think about the different work streams, or what were the work streams that encompass this data manager role?
My role has actually evolved. When I started, my title was Director of Data and Assessment, and I was really focused on our academic data and supporting our principals and teachers in getting their academic data that they needed. And now my work covers that work, but also our compliance, and a lot of moved into like overseeing like the end of year reporting for the state and more comprehensive. And that has been it really came out of like realizing that all of these things need to be streamlined, and like all of our data systems needed to work together more effectively to save us work. When they were more siloed, we were, creating more work for ourselves, and our systems didn't all flow together as well as they could. So that, I think, made a lot of sense for our organization, but also kind of stretched me in that I was less in supporting our staff with the academic data, which is something that we have a need for. So I think that that's been a balance for us of like having me be more of like the systems person, but then that takes away from time. I'm less like hands-on or less able to just help people get the data that they want. So I think it makes the most sense for our organization, but I also, we've tried to build up the capacity of others to make sure to move away from having like one data person to having more people who are building those skills and are able to support school teams with those academic asks.
Great. So I'm hearing reflected in that sort of the work around systems and processes, but there's also been work streams which hopefully get delegated across in terms of data collection, as well as sort of data management, data analysis, and those pieces. And I think we can return each of those work streams in a bit. But Alan and Allison, any reflections on sort of what are the core responsibilities that you've either held or hold in your data manager roles?
I'll let him go. Yeah, similar to Amanda, I started much more in the assessment arena and academic data. My title at my last school is Director of Data and Research. So the idea of this research still focused on academics, but also looking at how we build systems so that we can grow across the network, and then have analytics on how we're doing so that we can grow as an organization. And in my current role, it's very still, I was brought on data strategies, very much building that system to support a school that's about to grow. I think a big core responsibility, my focus this year, like my theme for the year, is foundations for a data culture, because we are so new. And with that is creating a professional learning series throughout the year. So with my operations team, it's really figuring out where are they in their data journey, and what things that would make both of our lives easier if they just built more skill capacity. So for most of the people I work with, they're in a place where they would like to be a little more savvy in how they're able to collect data and feel like they can create tools on their own. So building their capacity there. And then also, even with school leaders and teachers, making sure there's this basic comfortability with data, if they see it in a certain format, what that means. And with teachers, in my experience, it's tended to be a little more, you'll get some that are passionate about it and some that aren't, and that's great, right? The ones that are really into it kind of wear that like mini data hat for their team, and I kind of think of them as data ambassadors. And again, building those relationships with your schools that you can rely on someone to help if you have to be at a different school site, or a teacher just that has a little more knowledge and comfortability in the building always helps. I think another core responsibility is figuring out, okay, we have all these different systems that we want to use this year. How are we going to get the data in a place that we can create dashboards for teachers and school leaders to give them the information they want. But then I also am meeting my state reporting needs. So it's a little bit, my focus this year is on training, but then also figuring out like systems and how we're gonna be able to utilize the systems we have in place, and if there are any other resources we need to look into.
Wonderful, thank you. Alan, if there's anything you wanted to add as well about some of the core responsibilities you've held in the past.
Yeah, so state reporting always makes a big appearance because you have to. It's a legal requirement. But it's hard to get the other things wrong with your data culture if state reporting is right, because there's just so much that you've got to collect and have clean and ready to go. You know, attendance, course enrollments, who's in the building, who's not, what they're doing. So that's always pretty central. I will say in one of my favorite times working in data management was specifically being at Green Tech High as the assistant data coordinator, working with our assessment data. We had a program where any teacher, any assessment, didn't matter what subject, what kind of rubric they wanted to use. If they worked with us ahead of time in the data office, we were able to give them a deep dive report about the various categories of things that they were assessing, how their students did compared to, say, the same assessment years prior if they had also worked with us in the past, things like that. And we would just churn out hundreds of these a year. And for the teachers who used it, it was just great to see them be able to reflect and refine their approach just really quickly. You know, to give a quiz one day and then come back the next day and do a reteach. That was always great to see, to actually see the results almost in real time of just the teamwork that comes with working with data well. And to see leadership also be able to reflect on that and say, you know, what's going on in this classroom, what's going on with this teacher. Yeah, those are my most fun times. Sometimes I've seen the overlap go the other way towards more of the IT, technical, computers and networks kind of stuff, and that is just way less fun. Way less fun.
Well, I appreciate all of your reflections, because I think, not to overly simplify, I mean, you guys talked a lot about the variety of work streams here, but to think about, you know, our approach as we continue down this conversation on both sort of what you mentioned, Alan, sort of the compliance and state reporting side, which is a bit of the elephant in the room whenever we talk about data in schools, because it's obviously state mandated. You know, these are the things that you're kind of bottom lined about with data in schools. But then also, each of you touched about the use of data in the school to drive performance, to drive achievement. So we'll explore both of those threads and then open it up to our audience. But I am interested in hearing from each of you, how did you prepare for data reporting and collection each year? What did you have to do within sort of yourself or your data team? And then also, how did you prepare the school for some of that mandated reporting? I think many of the people on this call are interested in improving their own systems. So this doesn't always feel like the fire drill that it sometimes can feel like. How did you prepare for that? And what does that look like at the schools you've worked at?
So I'm going to just jump in here. In my experience, charter schools tend to have very strong leadership. And as a result, making things happen with data and process always started with strong leadership buy-in. That person at the top, whether it be a director of operations or a special projects manager, sometimes the principal or chief academic officer, has to say at the start of the thing when they're assigning this to whoever they're assigning it to, you've got to work with the data people to make sure that this is right. Because otherwise things are happening that you as the data manager don't know about. And so you can't really shepherd that data along the way. But it always started with leadership buy-in, at least when it went well, in my experience.
I think Alan made a great point about, you know, if your state reporting is going well, it's hard for other things to not be going well, I think is the way that you phrase it. And I think that is something you've learned is like, the state reporting shouldn't be something, it's additional like work to get it done, but it shouldn't be additional like data collection, because all of that data is stuff that you need in other ways. And so I think thinking about how you're setting up at the front end. So for us, like we do registration online through Schoolmint, and then Schoolmint syncs to PowerSchool. So I think our schools really have bought into that, because they used to be like manually creating student profiles, and they don't have to do that anymore. And we put a lot of thought into like, what does our registration look like? So can we get as much as possible in the front end that's sort of syncing through all of our systems, and we don't have to go back and think about it and do sort of manual input. And then do we have our like PowerSchool courses and things set up so that we're able to pull the data out easily? And I think once we've really learned, once I was able to learn like what we need for state reporting and how all that lives in our systems, like it's not much of an extra burden if you have it set up. And so I think also to Alan's point about leadership, then it's like, I can have a vision for that, but then I need my leaders, official or otherwise, to buy into like doing all that correctly in the front end. And then again, like I said earlier, making sure they understand the why. There's a why for them, but there's also a why for us. And like some of it's just a legal requirement, but some of it hopefully is also useful to us as a school. So I think getting them to understand enough about the why that they buy into it, and also know like, hey, we're not telling you more because we don't want to burden you with state reporting. We want you to do these things that are more important for your campus. So I think we've made a lot of progress in just like streamlining all of that. And so it doesn't feel like we're doing something extra to meet that requirement. Like it's all in our system to begin with.
You have those strong input moments where the data comes in and flows into the collection. So it's not doing this retroactively, it sounds like.
Yeah, exactly.
And Allison, I know you mentioned in your bio about tips for automating state reporting. I think a lot of people on this call will be interested to hear. Do you have any best practices, any thoughts, any insights on what that looks like and how to achieve that?
Yeah, and I would say, it doesn't always have to be something fancy to automate it if you're really clear about like what the data looks like that you're getting, and then what format it has to be to submit it. And I think since there may be new data managers on the call, I think for me hopping into a new school last year, that my first step was just to do that, to just go to my student information system, go to my application system, and just export all the reports and just get a sense of like what data is in here, how complete is it, starting those conversations early, because you don't want to, automate something that's going to be changing throughout the year. You want to have clear definitions for things. And then on the flip side, I was able to log in and see what was submitted the prior year. So basically I was able to see like, this is what was in their system last year. This is what was submitted. And it gave me a sense of like the data rules that were kind of already in place before I got there. I think this is a good time of year for anyone new to start thinking about those things. And you're going to maybe see some quick areas for improvement. Maybe there's data not there and someone manually typed it in the year before or something like that. And you learn like, oh, it'd be great if we had a process for this. So I would say, at my prior school, the automation was much more robust. There was a larger budget for it. It was a focus of the school. So what that looked like is having like our internal database where all of our systems were loading data into. So that meant from really early on, I could run queries just to see how complete data is daily. I could just run something and it'll let me know the state of my data across the whole network. Again, that's, costly and took a lot of time to set up, but the benefits of it were, the data team I worked with, it was so great that I can put, one person on just like, an hour of their day was just making sure that 4 schools data was looking good. And it just kept us in a good place. Where I am, we're small, we don't need that yet. It's also not within our budget. So the automating is really just utilizing like some JavaScript, even some Excel formulas that, hey, if I plop a CSV file in this place, then it looks like the final product we need for reporting in this other place. And it takes a little longer to set up, right, than that one day that you're just like moving data and copying and pasting. we don't want to do any of that kind of transformation of data if we can help it. And if you start early, then you can start thinking about, how do I create a template or a transformation process so that as data is coming in, it's shifting and putting everything into the exact format we need.
I appreciate that. That's super helpful. I'm going to ask one more question to the this moderated portion, and then I'll open it up to our participants in the call. So if you have questions for our panel, feel free to start shooting them into the chat, or just be prepared to come off mute after this follow-up question. But definitely want to open this up to those of us in the audience with additional questions. So you talked a little bit about the state data reporting component of the work. As I said, I want to talk a little about the other sort of sphere that we touched on, which is student or school data culture, and how can you help promote the use of data across the school. Ellen, you talked a little bit about this with the use of the assessment reporting when you were at Green Tech. But I'm interested to hear from all of you, like, have you seen examples of really good use of school internal data to help drive performance, and how did that look, and how did they get to the point where they were using that process consistently? What did it take to get to that culture?
I think we still definitely, this does not look the way that we ideally want it to, but we have, when we have been the most successful, it's because we have structures in place for like weekly data meetings. So our teachers and vice principals meet and look at data at least weekly, and then it's depending on the week, it's, if there's a larger assessment, they're looking at that. If it's not a larger assessment, they're looking at like the exit ticket data. And so I think that, we have the bones of the structure. It's just like, we have the time on the calendar, we have the systems for collecting that data. And then I think we were in a really good place before the pandemic. And that was one of the things that's like was hardest coming back from the pandemic, because I think we had shifted into such like emergency mode. And there was still, still last year we had so many like people being out, or students being out. And I think it was one of the frustrating things, is like it really derailed a lot of like the great work I feel like we had done to set up those systems. So I'd say we're still in a place of repairing them. But those are the structures that we use. And I think we have had a lot of success in like our younger grades, where there's multiple teachers like teaching the same subjects, and so it makes sense to come together as a group and to like support each other. I think we've had a harder time at the high school, where you have only one teacher who's teaching physics, and so they should be looking at their data, but they don't have a team in exactly the same way, and so it's harder. We found it harder to like build those structures that are clear to everyone in those cases. So I would say we have some great things happening, and then definitely like some areas where this is a big area of improvement for us.
Appreciate that the candidness, and I totally understand the dynamic between like younger grade PLCs, where you have 2 or 3 or 4 teachers who are teaching at first grade class, versus the more specialization you receive at the high school level.
So I'm going to throw something very opinionated out here about this. I've seen a lot of schools try to start this by focusing on state test results, NWEA, other sort of high stakes, highly evaluative things. And I think that's actually the wrong approach, because it is so high stakes and because it is so infrequent. To most of the school, it feels just like a burden that doesn't make anyone's life any easier. It's just another way for someone to judge what's happening in a school, and probably with a very critical lens. Now, granted, I'm of the opinion also that looking at these results is important for how we communicate about what our schools are doing externally. But for internally building a data culture, it's a very high pressure way to do so. And I mostly see it stagnate when I've seen people try to start there. I very much advocate for start with the small things. Start with a classroom assessment. Start with looking at attendance versus the weather, or just the kinds of things where you can very quickly show people when we collect data and we analyze data, this is what we have. So yeah, just throwing that out there.
Appreciate that. Allison?
Yeah, I would say to build off of that, it reminds me a lot of, you know, my prior school, I was definitely in a place that everyone wanted all the data, everyone was very invested, kind of to Amanda's point, you know, sometimes feeling like, how am I going to give this analysis and, you know, high level report to people. So that was a great place to be. Also, sometimes people don't fully understand their capacity to take in that much data. And so also to Alan's point, like really helping your leadership team focus in for just a couple areas. I've been through the process of creating a lot of really beautiful flashy dashboards that no one has time to look at. But through that process, we figured out what we do want to look at. So I would say too, like, don't get frustrated with the process, because sometimes your school has to go through that process, right? Of, oh, we thought this was really important, or we thought we wanted to look at assessment this way, but we realized this isn't that helpful once we tried to make decisions, or we felt like the data was incomplete. I think as long as your mindset going in is that, hey, we really want to make attendance better, and we think having a dashboard with this information is going to help our teachers reach out to families and be proactive. And then also keep in your head that, like, and we may discover that there's other data we need to have, or that the dashboard needs to look a little different. And as long as you have those good relationships and those structures in place where you're talking to people, then you'll get to the place where you've made something that you feel like, you know, makes an impact. Because you know, no one wants to make something that, you know, at the end of the day didn't help anyone. But I have noticed that sometimes things just do need to take their course, and then you finally will come to this, you know, ultimate. The example I can think of is we figured out we really wanted to have some way to flag at-risk students, and everyone had their own version of what it, you know, is at risk based on attendance. Is it based on academics? Is it based on reading level? And we kind of took this hybrid approach by the end, that it's a little bit of all of these things. And it was this really powerful monthly meeting that our team had, where anyone who was involved in any of those areas of the students on this list could come together and be proactive. But it took, you know, 6 or 7 months for us to come to that realization and settle on something.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that really concrete example of some that working through that problem of how do you analyze the data this way. I'm going to turn it over to our audience. I already saw that Philip, you added a question in the chat. I'm gonna read it unless you want to come off mute to ask it. But after Philip, we'll also open it up to others with questions. But Philip asked, what do you do to ensure the accuracy of the input when working with many members? So I think we touched on this a little bit, but I'm really interested. What are you doing to check accuracy and completeness, quite frankly, when you're pulling in data from so many input places?
I'll start. One of my principles when trying to get people to give me accurate data is make it as easy as possible to do the right thing. It's about really strong, very visual instructions, color code things where you can, build in like error checks and validation along the way. Don't let them put in the wrong thing if you can avoid that. As much as you can, as if the right thing is the easiest thing to do, people will do the right thing. Typically, people don't want to put in bad data. It's just easier than the alternative. So for me, it's just make it as simple as possible. Make it as clear as day, and you'll get what you need.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I think sometimes it can be hard to understand why something seems so simple to you and then is not simple for them. And so I think, again, back to my point about like being a presence on campus, building relationships, like being aware of what's going on so that because yeah, sometimes I think you think like your goal is to make it as simple as possible. And then you realize, oh, wait, actually that person has to do these 3 steps that I didn't quite realize they had to do they don't have that information in front of them when they're doing this step. And I thought they did. And so I think you really have to understand it from their perspective, and then remove any barriers and make it simple and fast. And then I think, again, just checking on it, because it's something that might have felt simple and fast when you all set up the system and communicated at the beginning of the year. Maybe it's something they do infrequently, and so they forgot. And they were, forgot that it was actually easy to do, or they're doing it the wrong way. And so I think making sure that you have some way you're regularly checking in, so you can catch early if something isn't working the way you thought it was, and you need to change the system, or just remind people of what you're asking them to do.
I would say all of those things. I don't have that much to add. I think the only other times I could think of ways that we've caught things early is just having summaries for people more often, and ways to roll up the data. Because I think to Alan's point, sometimes we're a little agnostic that if that's the number that's in, that's the number that's in. We don't always know quite enough about the day-to-day, but sometimes just sending a school leader or an ops director a summary of this is how many students in each grade, or this is how many people enrolled today, that they can easily think of oh no, that's not what I saw on my end. And sometimes when you roll things up for people, they're able to quickly give you feedback, and you give them feedback about how to improve entering that data.
Thank you for that. Are there any other questions? Thanks, Philip, for that question. Any other questions from the audience? I use my teacher wait time here. Make it extremely uncomfortable for people. Well, with that said, we're coming to sort of the last 10 minutes of the session, so I will pause it here. I know there's so many more avenues we can go down to talk about sort of data collection systems. How do you categorize and collect, especially when you need to collect, say, 100% of data from students? But all those are still opportunities. I want to thank all three of you, Alan, Amanda, Allison. Thank you so much for joining us today. The insights were very helpful and remarkable. I hope those of you in the audience felt like you got something out of the conversation today. And that there's still more opportunities for us to dialogue and converse about this stuff. With that being said, I do want to turn over the mic to Tracy Davey, who is from Eastern Suffolk BOCES, who's on the call today. We talked a little bit of state data reporting in the Q&A or in the panel, and now let's actually get into some logistics here. Tracy, I think you're going to share with us a little bit about some deadlines that are approaching, so I'll turn it over to you.
Hi, everybody. That was a fantastic presentation, and I see a lot of known friends out here, and the information was just great. And I have to tell you, I adjusted the resources I'm going to give you in my little chat here based on what was said. So I work at Eastern Suffolk BOCES, and I'm the manager of the collections of state reporting, all those requirements through level 0 at Eastern Suffolk BOCES. There'll be 275 schools in New York City this year. So I can give you a lot of the big picture, and if you are a city school, you're definitely going to call me for more information. So the first two
I'm sorry, Tracy, to interrupt you. We're getting a little bit of static on the line. Might be an audio input. Just want to make sure that everybody's clear.
Any better?
Still a little bit staticky, but that's...
Okay, maybe it's not. Can you hear me or no?
You can hear you just coming in a little bit, cutting in and out, a little bit staticky. I'm sorry to disrupt your presentation, but I think we have a few people having difficulty hearing.
Something must have come unplugged.
No worries.
Any better now? Hello, any better?
It's a bit better. We'll try to push through. I appreciate your flexibility. I'm wondering if we now have a frozen issue. We're going to give Tracy a moment to get reset up. In the meantime, while we're waiting, I am going to turn the mic over to Natasha Cherry-Perez, one of our community engagement managers. Tracy, do we have you back? Do we have you back, Tracy?
I'm here, yes. Can you hear me?
Yes,
now?
we can hear you much more clearly now. Wonderful.
Okay, I put my laptop off the station there. Okay, so two things that are going to be due early in the school year. Right now, Your charter leader should be working on the end of year certification. All of that data that was reported, throughout the 21-22 school year does need to be certified. It needs to be certified by your charter leader. Although you may be able to log into the business portal, only the charter leader can complete the certification. And that is due by September 2nd. Usually the state will have a paper document that you could certify there. That's not available yet. If you happen to miss this deadline, then you just fax it into data support. The next major first deadline, and this is really specific to the Information Reporting Service Office, is the institutional master file. That's actually also known as BEDS Online. That will be due in early November. The master file is not in level 0. It's a report that goes directly to the state education department. And that's actually one of the things I kind of want to point out. Not everything that the state requires is through one office. It's multiple offices that will ask for information and using various different systems. So I definitely recommend, keeping an eye on the information out of the state. One way to do that, in the upper section of the screen here, when I'm looking for anything from the state, I type in right in the address bar, NYCSA.gov, and then I put what I'm looking for. And instead of searching the World Wide Web, it'll search State Ed's website for exactly what I'm looking for, and stuff comes up very quickly. So right here is an image of the IRS, Information Reporting Services Office's webpage. And in the lower left-hand corner, they have some important documents. And I checked this morning. They have not put out yet an annual reporting memo or the timeline, but I do have a couple insights I'll share with you about that timeline. Those will be 2 very important documents. Resources to everything is also right here. So that end of year certification, it gets completed again at the business portal at portal.nysed.gov, and it can only be done by your charter leader. This is from 2021 school year. Just went live this past weekend, and the paper document's not yet available. Otherwise, I would have shown that for you. As your charter leader is going through it, or when you have the opportunity, if they ask you to look at it with them, I just want to kind of point out one here. So they tell you in SIRS, if you were to go into L2RPT, this is the folder you would find the exact report. So if you're a high school, you need to look at the SIRS 309 to make sure that all of your region's data has been reported. And then your leader is going to have to answer one of 3 ways: that the data is accurate, they're certifying the data for their school, or they can't certify it if they happen to know that something is missing or inaccurate. And the third option is that there's no report for your school. So a K-3 building probably doesn't have any Regents exams, and they would choose that third option. Just kind of wanted to highlight that for you. As I mentioned, some reporting goes directly to the state education department. This is a view of some of their systems. Data.nysa.gov is just a school report card where you can view information. Cognos is where you see, access L2RPT, level 2 reporting. Over here, when you're on the business portal, you'll see various applications based on your rights to the system. And the user guide right here spells out, how to do all that. But checking CEDREP is really important. If you have a new charter leader, you're going to want to make sure that State Ed knows their name and their email address so that they can log into the portal and do that end of year certification. So I recommend, getting to CEDREP. You can do a query on your school. The easiest way to do it is to use a couple of wildcards, a %sign. Like if you're at Achievement First Network, you can just put in those words, throw a wildcard at the end, you'll see a list of all of your schools. And then certain titles are posted here publicly. You'll be able to see the name of the person. By tapping on the title, you can ensure that the contact information is correct. Probably everyone on this call should be listed here somehow. Maybe you're the data coordinator, the data protection officer, you could be a HR person. By having your name associated with your school in CEDREF, which stands for the State Education Reference File, whenever there's an important announcement from State Ed or data posted to the portal, that end of year certification deadline, you'll get queued up with an email. There is a title, I don't know if it's shown here, I don't see it. There's a title of other contact. if you are at a large network of charter schools and the executive officer is one person who's maybe not in your building, if you have the title of other contact, then you will receive a copy of every email that goes from the state to your charter leader. And that might just help them to keep on track of things. So the biggest change that we know is coming for the current year annual expectations and deadline is all of the out of certification reporting, which is the courses at your school, when are final grades given, which teachers teach which classes, and the students in those classes. We recommended schools, this was our target last year, fall or winter, and we're going to keep with that. But the deadline was in April, the end of April. This year is going to be the end of January. So we just want to make sure you're aware of that. I also want to highlight that there are multiple software systems that have this data. If you are creating a schedule in that system, you should be able to hit a button and get the report that you need. The 4 players over here have been in the game for a long time: Infinite Campus, eSchool Data, PowerSchool, and School Tool. Alma is now getting certified because they had so many schools in the city, they're really working on that. And they have a bunch of the reports. Again, hit a button and load it straight up into level 0. And then a word from our sponsors. So let me hit an enter here on my chat. This gives you links to all of the various different systems that I mentioned and directions to how to update CEDREF, and then also a link to our website. Although you may not be in New York City, I'd be glad to chat with you. Actually, Alan, Green Tech, I know Paul DeVeros, we've worked together on presentations and such at Daytag. So if you see him, tell him I said hello. And everyone else, all my current contacts and new friends, I appreciate seeing you here today also.
Well, thank you so much, Tracy. Really appreciate that information. If you don't mind just sending me that PowerPoint, we'll get it posted after this session. I know we're coming to the top of the hour, but I do want to make sure we have time for some general announcements from the association. So I'll quickly turn it over to Natasha Cherry Perez, our New York City Community Engagement Manager. She works closely with our schools across New York City, but particularly with Brooklyn and Manhattan. Natasha, do you want to talk a little bit about our voting campaign, or Get Out the Vote campaign?
Yes. Hi, everyone. Good morning. Just wanted to quickly tell you that we're in the midst of voting season, and voting is very important, especially as a charter community. So we have built a wonderful voting website where you can have like a one-stop shopping for just like all your voting information. Today, for instance, is the August primary. So today we're voting for our U.S. representatives and our state senators. The polls are open from 6 to 9 p.m. And what we want to do is make sure that the charter community has a place where they can go find information. And we're also going above and beyond, and we're making voting registration sessions available, and also information sessions available to our schools. We're going to have our next set in October, right before the general election. So stay tuned for that. And for our member schools, if you want to set up sessions specifically for your charter community, we have a session where we can virtually or in person get your staff or families or even your high school students registered to vote. And then we could take it a step further. Once they're registered to vote, we can have another session or do a 2-for-1 and talk about, how do you research candidates? How do you look up your ballot? How do you know how to fill it out? What do you need when you go to the poll? So, all of those things are very important, and we want to be able to give you the tools that you need to get registered, and then also the information so that you are prepared when you go to cast your vote. If you're interested, please let me know. Mike is going to drop the website in the chat. We also have a flyer that you can use and share with your families. You can back at home, put it in the office with staff, give it to your kids. And it has all this information about our landing page and what we offer. So if you're interested, please get in touch with me. We'd be happy to come out and do sessions for your schools, because it's very, very, very important for us to vote. And that's it. Make sure you vote today if you haven't already. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Natasha. Really appreciate you giving that plug. And please make sure everyone go vote today. Get ready for the general as well in November. I'm just going to wrap it up real quickly. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. The materials for today's session, the recording, the PowerPoint from Tracy, all of that will be posted to our resource center, which Kevin's going to drop the link to access our digital site, basically our workspace within our resource center, where you can access materials from the data working group. That stuff will go up probably tomorrow. I'll need to edit the video and get all the materials collected, but you can use this link, getting access to our resource center and specifically the digital workspace for the data working group. I want to thank Allison, Amanda, Alan for all of your insights. Thank you, Tracy, for the updates on data reporting deadlines. And just thank everyone for joining us today. We'll have our next session on September 28th, where we'll focus on best practices for level 0 reporting and preparing for student attendance data reporting. So it'll be a bit more of a tutorial session, but we look forward to seeing you all there. Have a wonderful rest of your day and a wonderful start to your school years. Thank you so much.